I
There's a
reckon
moment
I
in
ain't
every
never
parent's
gonna
life
see
when
her
they wonder
again.
if all the sacrifices they made were even worth it. For me, that moment came one quiet evening, sitting across the dinner table from my grown son. We weren't arguing. There was no yelling, just a single sentence that cut through me like a knife. "You're just a burden to me." I didn't scream. I didn't fight back. I just sat there, staring at the man I had raised, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, the child. I stayed up late working extra shifts for. My hands trembled, my heart pounded, but I kept silent. That night, as the house grew quiet, I lay awake replaying those words in my head, over and over again. A burden. Something inside me broke, but not in the way you might think. I didn't spiral into despair. I didn't beg for his approval. Instead, I made a choice that would change both our lives forever. Before sunrise, I packed a small bag. No fanfare, no drama. Just a single note on the kitchen table. "I love you, but I can't stay where I'm not respected." Then I walked out the door and vanished from his world. What happened next shocked him and taught him a lesson he would never forget. This is the story of how I disappeared and how my son was forced to face life without me. I wasn't born into wealth. Far from it. My story began in a small town where the streets turned to mud after every rain, where neighbors still waved to each other on their porches, and where hard work wasn't a choice. It was survival. I was the youngest of 3 brothers, and from the time I could walk, I worked. Morning paper routes, after-school jobs, summers spent repairing fences and hauling hay for neighbors who paid me in sandwiches instead of cash. Every scar on my hands, every callus on my palms was earned. I didn't mind, in fact, I was proud. When my wife and I had our son Mark, everything changed. I swore I would give him a better life than I ever had. I worked 2 jobs, one at the factory, another as a janitor on weekends. There were nights I came home so late that Mark was already asleep, but I would still sneak into his room, sit on the edge of his bed and watch him breathe. I promised myself silently that I'd never let him feel the hunger I felt as a child, never let him see the lights get turned off because we couldn't pay the bill. Those were hard years, but they were full of love. Birthdays celebrated with homemade cakes, Christmas mornings with secondhand toys that I'd spent months secretly repairing and repainting. I never cared that my back ached or that my shoes were full of holes. What mattered was that Mark smiled. Bart. The time he was a teenager, we'd saved enough to move to a slightly bigger house. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a small backyard where I planted a garden. On weekends, I taught him how to fix a leaky faucet, how to change a tire, how to swing a hammer straight. I thought we were building more than just shelves and fences. I thought we were building respect. But as the years went by, something shifted. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I spoiled him too much. I wanted his life to be easier, and maybe in doing that, I made him think it was easy. He started rolling his eyes at my advice. He'd say things like, "Dad, you wouldn't understand. Things are different now." I'd shrug it off, thinking it was just teenage rebellion. When my wife passed away unexpectedly, it was just the 2 of us left. Mark was in college by then, and I emptied nearly every cent of my savings to pay for his tuition. I wanted him to have opportunities I never had, to step into a future without the weight of debt on his back. After graduation, he came back home, but he wasn't the same. He had big city dreams now, and I could see the impatience in his eyes every time he looked at me. I still cooked breakfast every morning, still kept the house running, still fixed everything that broke. But now, instead of gratitude, there was indifference. Our home, once noisy with laughter, music, and my wife's humming in the kitchen, had grown quiet. The only sounds were the clinking of dishes and the low hum of the TV in the evenings. Mark would come home, drop his bag, and disappear into his room. Sometimes he'd stay out all night without saying a word. I tried to talk to him gently. "Son," I'd say, "life's not just about money or status. It's about how you treat people." He would nod without really listening. Even in that silence, I loved him fiercely. Every Saturday morning, I'd still get up early, make coffee, and head to the market to buy his favorite bread. I'd leave it on the counter before he woke up. I'd iron his shirts before work, even when he never asked. I kept the house clean, paid the bills on time, and mowed the lawn. And still there was a growing distance between us, a distance I could feel in my bones but didn't know how to close. Then came that night at dinner. I'd made stew, the same recipe my wife used to make, and I was proud of it. As we sat down, I asked him how work was going. He sighed, irritated, as though even speaking to me was a burden. And then, without even looking at me, he said it. "You're just a burden, Dad." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire you can't put out. I froze. My spoon slipped from my hand and clattered against the bowl. For a long moment, I just stared at him, trying to understand if I'd heard him correctly. But he didn't take it back. He didn't even flinch. I nodded slowly, quietly finished my dinner, and didn't say another word for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. That night, I sat in my chair by the kitchen window, staring out at the moonlit yard. The house was silent except for the ticking clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. My wife's old photo hung on the wall across from me, her warm smile frozen in time. I could almost hear her voice asking softly, "What happened to us, Jake? When did home stop feeling like home?" I wanted to tell myself it was just stress talking, that Mark didn't mean it. But those words, "You're just a burden," kept replaying in my head, each time sharper, crueler. I had given everything for that boy, worked my hands raw, missed my own dreams, and now, to him, I was just dead weight. The next morning was like any other, at least on the surface. I cooked breakfast out of habit, but there was no warmth in it, no care. Just mechanical motions, crack eggs, toast bread, pour coffee. Mark came downstairs late, grabbed his plate, and muttered a distracted thanks without even looking at me. I watched him scroll on his phone while he ate, chuckling at some video, completely unaware that I had barely slept. "Long night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He shrugged. "Went out with friends. What else am I supposed to do around here? It's boring." The word hit me like another slap. Boring. "This is still your home, son," I said quietly. He didn't look up. "Yeah, but it feels like a retirement home." "You don't get it, Dad. Things are different now. You just sit here all day. You don't work. You don't do anything. It's like I have to take care of you now." I felt my jaw tighten. "I keep this place running, Mark. I make sure the bills are paid, the yard is kept, the house stays together." He interrupted, setting his phone down with a sharp clack. "And I appreciate that, but honestly, sometimes it feels like I'm stuck taking care of a roommate who can't pull his weight. I've got enough on my plate without worrying about you too." The words stung worse than the night before. This wasn't a one-off comment. This was what he really thought of me. I wanted to yell, to remind him of every sacrifice I'd made. The late nights, the tuition I paid, the life I'd built for him from nothing. But instead, I just nodded. "All right," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "I hear you." He grabbed his bag and left for work, leaving me alone with the sound of the door slamming. I sank back into the chair, my hands trembling. Part of me wanted to chase after him, demand an apology, demand respect. But another part of me, the quieter part, whispered that it wouldn't matter. He didn't see me as a father anymore. For the next few days, things between us were held. We barely spoke except for the basics. Dinner's ready, mail's on the counter, lights are on. Mark stayed out later and later, sometimes not coming home at all. But I noticed something else. He had started leaving more and more responsibilities to me. His laundry piled up in the basket, dishes stacked in the sink, bills left unopened on the counter. It was as if he assumed I'd just keep doing it all no matter how he treated me. Each small slight added to the growing storm inside me. The disrespect wasn't just words. It was in every careless action, every ignored conversation, every slammed door. One evening, I sat in my wife's old rocking chair, the one she used to sit in when she read bedtime stories to Mark. I ran, my fingers along the worn wood, and felt something inside me settle. I realized that staying here, staying invisible, staying silent, was only teaching Mark that this was acceptable. That it was okay to take me for granted, to treat me like I didn't matter. And that's when I decided I would leave. Not in anger, not in revenge, but because he needed to see what life was like without me holding it all together. The next morning, while Mark was still asleep, I started packing. Not much, just a duffel bag with some clothes, my wallet, my tools, and a few keepsakes. I walked through the house one last time, taking in every detail. The photo of my wife, the scuffed door frame where we had measured Mark's height as he grew, the kitchen table where we'd once shared so much laughter. I sat down and wrote a note. Mark, I love you more than you will ever know. But I can't stay in a place where I'm seen as a burden. You're an adult now, and it's time for you to take responsibility for your life, and without me holding it all together. If you need me, you know where to find me. Dad. I folded it carefully and placed it on the kitchen counter where he'd be sure to see it. As I stood at the door, bag slung over my shoulder, I hesitated. For a moment, I almost turned back, almost convinced myself to wait, to try one more time to talk to him. But then I remembered the look on his face when he said those words, the way he didn't even hesitate, didn't even flinch. I stepped outside, closed the door, and walked away. The house was silent when Mark woke up the next morning, too silent. No smell of coffee, no sound of the kettle whistling, no quiet footsteps in the kitchen. He yawned, wandered downstairs, and saw the note on the counter. His brow furrowed as he read it once, then again. At first he laughed under his breath. What is this, some kind of stunt? He crumpled the note and tossed it toward the trash. But as the minutes passed, something in him started to twist. The house felt strange, hollow. He opened the fridge and realized there was no breakfast waiting. No bread on the counter, no milk in the jug. Whatever, he muttered, grabbing a stale granola bar and heading out the door. But as the day went on, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling in his chest. His phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts from Jake. By the time he came home that night, the house was still empty. The following days were worse. At first, Mark tried to keep up appearances, telling himself that his dad would be back soon, that this was temporary. But reality hit fast. The bills started piling up. Jake had always handled them quietly, never making a fuss about due dates or late fees. Now, envelopes sat unopened on the counter until Mark finally tore into them. Groaning at the numbers, the lawn grew wild. Saturday mornings used to be for coffee and yard work, something Jake actually enjoyed, humming to himself as he pushed the mower. Mark kept telling himself he'd do it this weekend, but the weekends came and went. The grass reached his knees, before the neighbors started complaining. Inside the house, dishes stacked higher and higher in the sink. The trash overflowed. Dust collected on shelves. The home that had always felt warm and cared for now looked abandoned, and somehow lonelier than ever. Mark tried to ignore it all, burying himself in work and nights out with friends. But even that started to crumble. He was tired all the time. Meals were skipped or eaten cold. His shirts were wrinkled. His car overdue for an oil change. The little details Jake used to take care of quietly were suddenly glaringly obvious. Then came the first real blow, a notice taped to the door. The electricity bill was overdue. If payment wasn't made in 48 hours, the power would be cut off. Mark cursed under his breath, pulling at his hair. He paid it online at the last minute, but the panic in his chest lingered long after the screen showed payment successful. For the first time, he began to realize just how much his father had done for him, things he had never even noticed. It wasn't just about chores. It was the stability, the invisible safety net. Jake was the reason the house never fell apart, the reason Mark never missed a bill, the reason there was always food in the fridge. And now, that safety net was gone. One night, after a particularly rough day at work, Mark came home late. He dropped his bag on the couch and sat in the quiet, staring at the note he had pulled back out of the trash. I can't stay where I'm not respected. The words hit differently now. He heard them in his dad's quiet, patient voice, a voice that had always been there, teaching him, guiding him. He remembered the time Jake stayed up all night fixing his car before a big job interview. The way he had worked extra shifts to pay for Mark's graduation suit. The day he stood in the rain for 3 hours at Mark's first soccer game because no one else could make it. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt ashamed. He picked up the phone, hesitated, then dialed Jake's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Hey, Dad," Mark said after a long pause. "I got your note. I didn't think you'd actually leave. I guess I thought you'd just take it like you always do. Listen, if you're hearing this, just call me, okay?" He hung up, but the call never came. Days turned into weeks. The silence grew heavier. The house, once a refuge, started to feel like a prison. Mark's friends noticed the change. He stopped going out as much, stopped laughing as easily. When they asked what was wrong, he just shrugged it off. How? Could he explain that the man he had once called a burden had been the only thing keeping him afloat? 3 weeks passed, and the house no longer felt like home. Mark woke up one morning to find the kitchen sink clogged, a foul smell rising from the standing water. He stared at it for a moment, overwhelmed. Usually Jake would have had it fixed, before Mark even noticed there was a problem, but Jake wasn't there. Mark grabbed a wrench, fumbling through YouTube tutorials. It took him 2 hours and a near flood before he gave up, finally calling a plumber, who charged him more than half a week's salary. By the time the plumber left, the frustration in Mark's chest was boiling over. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the growing stack of unpaid bills, the overgrown lawn outside, the dirty laundry scattered around. For the first time, he said the words out loud. "Dad, I miss you." That night, as if the universe wanted to punish him further, his car broke down on the way home. He sat on the side of the road in the dark, rain pouring down, waiting 3 hours for a tow truck. He remembered all the times Jake had come to rescue him in the past. No questions asked, no complaints. The guilt was no longer just a quiet ache. It was heavy, suffocating. There he was. Jake stood with his back to him, hammer in hand, driving a nail into a weathered wooden post. The sight stopped Mark cold. His father looked smaller somehow, leaner. But there was a calmness about him that Mark hadn't seen in years. For a moment, Mark just watched, tears stinging his eyes. Then Jake turned, saw him, and froze. Neither spoke at first. The air was heavy, charged. Finally, Mark cleared his throat. "Hi, Dad." Jake set the hammer down, wiping sweat from his brow. "Mark." The single word carried 1,000 others. Surprise, caution, even a trace of pain. I've been looking for you," Mark said, stepping closer. Jake didn't move. "I figured you would eventually." The silence stretched. Mark's throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he blurted out, the words tumbling out faster than he expected. "I'm sorry for what I said, for how I treated you. I didn't mean it. Not really. I was stressed, frustrated, and I took it out on you, but you didn't deserve that." Jake's eyes softened, but he stayed quiet. "I thought I was grown up," Mark continued, his voice breaking. "I thought I didn't need you anymore, but when you left, I realized how much you held everything together, not just the house, but me. I didn't just lose my dad when you left. I lost my anchor, and I've been lost without you." Jake let out a long breath and sat down on the fence post. "I didn't leave to punish you," he said quietly. "I left because staying was teaching you the wrong lesson. You didn't see me as a father anymore, Mark. You saw me as someone who owed you something. That's not how family works." Mark nodded quickly, tears streaming down his face. "I know that now. I see it, Dad. And I hate the person I was that night. If I could go back, I'd keep my mouth shut. I'd say thank you. I'd say I love you." Jake's expression softened further, though his eyes were wet. "You were hurting too," Jake said. "I know life's been hard on you. I know the world feels heavier now than it did when I was your age. But you need to understand. Respect isn't just about words. It's about how you treat people when no one's watching. Mark swallowed hard. I get it, I do. And I want to do better. I want to be better. Jake stood and placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. I'm not coming home today, he said gently. Mark blinked, startled. You're not? I'm not ready, Jake said. And neither are you. You need to keep building your life, keep learning how to stand on your own. I'll come back when we're both ready. But I want you to know. I forgive you. The words broke something open in Mark. He let out a choked sob, nodding. Thank you, he whispered. Jake gave him a small smile. The first one Mark had seen in months. Now go home, son. Make me proud. Mark drove back to the city with a strange mix of grief and hope in his chest. For the first time, he felt the weight of responsibility, not as a punishment, but as an opportunity. He went home and started making changes. He organized the bills, cleaned the house, even framed Jake's note and hung it by the door as a reminder. Every day he called Jake, even if the calls just went to voicemail. He told him about the little things, mowing the lawn, fixing the sink, getting a raise at work. Weeks later, he got a short text back. Proud of you. Keep going. It wasn't a full reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start, and for Mark, that was enough. The weeks after that visit were some of the hardest of Mark's life, but also the most transformative. For the first time, he took full ownership of everything in the house. He set a strict schedule for paying bills, fixed the leaking faucet that had been dripping for months, and even tackled the overgrown backyard that had embarrassed him every time he looked outside. At work, something shifted too. Instead of dragging himself through the day, he showed up early, volunteered for extra shifts, and started saving money. The manager noticed, praising his initiative and giving him more responsibility. Each night, he'd sit in the clean, quiet kitchen and think about Jake. Sometimes he'd call and leave a voicemail. Sometimes he'd just sit with the phone in his hand, imagining what he'd say if his father actually picked up. The silence was still there, but now it didn't crush him, it motivated him. One Friday evening, Mark came home to find a small letter in the mailbox. The handwriting was familiar, neat, and steady. He ripped it open, heart racing. Mark, I've been hearing about the changes you've been making. I'm proud of you. I'll be back in town next weekend. Let's have dinner. Dad? Mark read the note 3 times, his hands trembling. His chest felt tight, part relief, part fear. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He spent the next week preparing, obsessing over every detail. He deep-cleaned the house, polished the floors, scrubbed the kitchen until it gleamed. He even cooked, trying to recreate the stew Jake used to make on cold nights, the one he had mocked that fateful evening. When Saturday finally came, Mark found himself pacing by the window, unable to sit still. Every sound outside made him glance toward the driveway. At exactly 6 p.m., he heard it, the low rumble of Jake's old truck. Mark's breath caught. Jake stepped out of the truck looking just as Mark remembered, maybe a little older, maybe a little stronger, but calmer, like a man who had found peace. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Mark opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Hi, Dad, he said, his voice soft but steady. Jake nodded. Hi, son. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other until Mark finally gestured toward the door. Come in. Dinner's ready. Inside, the house was warm and inviting. The table was set carefully, candles lit. Mark's stew simmered on the stove. Jake took a seat, glancing around the spotless room. You've been busy. Mark nodded. Yeah, I had to be. It's different without you here. Jake gave a small smile. That was the point. As they ate, the conversation was slow at first, cautious, almost formal. They talked about small things, work, the weather, the neighbors. But halfway through the meal, Mark couldn't hold it in any longer. I need to say this again, he said, setting down his spoon. I'm sorry. Not just for what I said, but for how I acted for years. I took you for granted. I treated you like a convenience instead of a person. Jake looked at him for a long moment. And what have you learned? Mark swallowed hard. That respect isn't just about words. It's about showing up, taking responsibility, being grateful. I used to think you were holding me back, but now I see you were the one pushing me forward the whole time." Jake's expression softened. He reached across the table, placing his hand over Mark's. "That's all I ever wanted you to see." The silence after Jake's words felt heavy, but comforting, like a deep breath after a storm. Mark gripped his father's hand tighter, his throat tight with emotion. "I don't just want to say sorry," he said quietly. "I want to do better. I want to be the kind of son Mom would have been proud of. The kind of man you'd be proud to call your son." Jake's eyes softened. "You already are, Mark. You just didn't know it yet." Mark blinked in surprise. "How can you say that after everything I said? After the way I treated you?" Jake leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but serious. "Because you changed. That's what matters. People make mistakes, big ones sometimes. But what they do after those mistakes is what defines them. And I can see that you've grown." For the first time since he was a teenager, Mark let his guard down completely. "I missed you so much, Dad," he said, his voice shaking. "At first I was angry you left. I thought you were just trying to teach me a lesson. But then the house fell apart, and I fell apart with it. I didn't realize how much you carried. Not just the chores and bills, but me. I didn't realize how safe you made me feel." Jake's jaw tightened, his eyes glistening. "I missed you too, son, every day. But I knew if I stayed, we'd just keep hurting each other. I had to step back so you could step forward." Mark nodded, tears running freely now. "You were right. It was the hardest thing I've ever gone through, but it changed me. I'm not the same person who said those words to you." Jake stood slowly, coming around the table. Mark rose to meet him, and without another word, Jake pulled him into a hug. It wasn't a quick, awkward hug. It was the kind that breaks something open inside you. The kind that says everything words can't. Mark clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "I know," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I forgive you." The two of them stood there for what felt like a long time, until the tears finally slowed and the house grew quiet again. But this time, it was a peaceful quiet. Later, they moved to the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, calmer now. "I'm not going to move back right away," Jake said gently. "I need to keep the life I started building for myself. And you need to keep building yours. But I want to come back for dinner every weekend. Start slow. Rebuild this together." Mark nodded, relief flooding his chest. "I'd like that. No, I'd love that." Jake smiled faintly. "Good. Because family isn't about living under the same roof. It's about showing up for each other, even when it's hard." Mark let out a shaky laugh. "Guess we're finally on the same page." Before Jake left that night, Mark handed him something. The framed note he had hung by the door. "I kept this here," Mark said. "Every morning I'd read it before leaving for work. It reminded me to do better, to make you proud." Jake looked at the note for a long moment, then smiled. "Keep it," he said. "You don't need my words to remind you anymore, you're living them." As Jake walked back to his truck, Mark followed him out, standing on the porch. "Hey, Dad," Mark called. Jake turned. "I love you." Jake's smile widened, warm and genuine. "I love you too, son. Always." The truck drove away, but this time Mark didn't feel abandoned. He felt hopeful. When the sound of Jake's truck faded into the night, the house was quiet again. But this time it didn't feel empty. It felt alive, like a place where something new had begun. Mark stood on the porch for a long time, breathing in the cool, night air, feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Peace. The next morning, Mark woke up before sunrise. The house was spotless, the kitchen counters shining. For the first time since his father had left, he brewed a pot of coffee not out of obligation, but out of choice. He sat at the table with a small smile on his face and thought about the night before. He remembered the weight of that hug, the quiet forgiveness in his father's voice, the way it felt like a dam had broken inside him. Something had shifted, not just between them but inside himself. He no longer felt like a boy resenting his father's presence. He felt like a man who had been given a second chance, and he wasn't about to waste it. That day, he made a list of everything he wanted to do differently, not just chores and bills, but how he wanted to live. He wanted to be present, to be grateful, to build something meaningful in his life instead of just existing. He started by calling his father again, just to tell him he hoped he had gotten home safely. Over the next few weeks, their weekly dinners became a ritual. Every Saturday, Jake would drive into town and the two of them would sit together, share a meal, and talk about life. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they sat in silence, but each time felt like another brick being laid in the bridge they were rebuilding. Mark also noticed changes in himself outside of those dinners. He stopped letting little things slide, no more ignoring bills until the last minute, no more letting the lawn grow wild, no more putting off responsibilities until they turned into crises. He started taking pride in his home, his work, and, most of all, in himself. His friends noticed too. One of them said one night, "Man, you've changed. You seem calmer, more grounded." Mark smiled, thinking about his dad. "Yeah," he said. "I guess I finally figured out what matters." It wasn't about proving himself anymore. It wasn't about running from responsibility or resenting the person who had carried him for so long. It was about learning to carry himself and appreciating the man who had taught him how, even when the lesson had been hard to swallow. One evening, months later, Mark sat at the kitchen table, flipping through old photo albums. There were pictures of his childhood birthday parties, Christmas mornings, first days of school. In almost every picture, Jake was there somewhere, smiling, holding him, standing behind him. He realized then that his father had always been behind him, even in the moments when Mark hadn't noticed. Tears welled in his eyes, but this time they weren't tears of guilt. They were tears of gratitude. He closed the album and picked up his phone, dialing his father's number. When Jake answered, Mark said simply, "Thanks, Dad, for everything." There was a pause on the other end, then Jake's warm chuckle. "That's what dads are for." That night, as Mark turned off the lights and went to bed, the house felt different. It no longer felt like a place weighed down by regret and loneliness. It felt like a home again, one he had worked to keep standing, one he had earned. In the months and years that followed, Mark carried the lesson with him. Whenever life got hard or frustrations piled up, he remembered the night his father walked away and how it had forced him to face himself. He remembered that respect wasn't just something you demanded from others, it was something you gave first. And slowly, as their relationship grew stronger, Mark realized something else. His father's leaving had been an act of love. Painful, yes, difficult, absolutely. But it had been the only thing that could have shaken him awake. The only thing that could have taught him what it meant to grow up. It wasn't a perfect story. There were still days when Mark slipped back into old habits, when impatience crept, inner stress made him irritable. But now he caught himself sooner. He apologized faster. He tried harder, because he knew now that family wasn't something you could take for granted. The story of the night his father disappeared became the turning point of Mark's life. It was the day he stopped being a passive passenger and took the wheel for himself. And though it hurt at the time, he came to see it as the greatest gift his father had ever given him. The gift of independence, humility, and respect. Looking back, Mark would often tell people that sometimes losing someone for a while is the only way to truly find them again. Sometimes you have to stand on your own before you can appreciate the ones who held you up. And every Saturday, when Jake knocked on the door for dinner, Mark made sure to greet him with a hug, the kind that said, "I see you. I respect you. I'm glad you're here." Because in the end, it wasn't just about what had been lost. It was about what they had built together after the breaking. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved just to make them realize your worth? Or maybe you've been on the other side, the one who didn't appreciate someone until they were gone? I'd love to hear your stories. Share them in the comments below. You never know who might need to read your words today. Sometimes hearing someone else's experience can be the push another person needs to repair a broken relationship or forgive themselves for the past. If this story touched your heart, take a second to hit the like button. It may seem small, but it helps this video reach more people who might be going through the exact same struggle right now. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories like this one. Every week I share real, raw, and powerful narratives about family, forgiveness, and personal growth. The kinds of stories that remind us all that we're not alone. Finally, if there's someone in your life who needs to hear this message, maybe a friend who's been struggling, or a family member you want to reconnect with, share this video with them. Sometimes the right story at the right time can change everything. You've heard my story. Now I want to hear yours. What would you have done if you were in Jake's shoes? Would you have stayed and fought or walked away like he did? Let's talk about it below, because these conversations matter, and they might just be the start of someone else's healing journey.